So I've got to read the last two chapters of Jean Gebser's The Ever-Present Origin for class in the morning, so I figured I may as well read them out loud in case anyone else was interested. So this is chapter 11, The Twofold Task. Quote, "What is done today in the name of art is impotence and untruth. This includes music after Wagner, as well as painting after Manet, Cézanne, Leibel, and Menzel. Where do we find the great personages who could justify the claim that there is an art of inescapable fated necessity? Let us seek the self-evident and requisite task awaiting such art." End quote. These sentences were written in 1917 by Oswald Spengler and remained unchanged in the second edition of 1922. As his remarks in other contexts show, they do not pertain only to the arts. Today, a generation later, we no longer need to seek the great personages. How dated this term sounds. Those who, in each his own area, have begun to change our world conception into a new world perception have been allowed to speak in the preceding chapters of this book. Nor do we need to seek any longer new tasks. The self-evident and requisite task awaiting us is now clear. It is unmistakable, the obvious consequence of all the temporic efforts and inceptions of the last 5 generations. It is a necessary task, since without it, we would give ourselves up, rather than achieving what has been given us to do. Since Spengler did not discern a task either for the arts or for the other areas of our lives, he wrote off the West. Nevertheless, although we are in a similar, if not more catastrophic post-war situation than Spengler, who had a precursor in the Wagner of the Twilight of the Gods, and a successor in Alfred Weber of the Fourth Man, it has befallen our generation to perceive and resolve the task entrusted to us. And Gebser was writing this pretty much during World War II, and also added a little bit to it afterward, but that's the post-war period he's talking about. Then as now, our situation is fraught with danger, since we are confronted by a twofold task. To the extent that the task is compelling, the danger is also increased. If we fail to fulfill the task, we abandon ourselves. Throughout the preceding discussion, we have constantly indicated the possibility of this surrender. The aperspectival world is not yet consolidated, and everything is still in flux. Above all, the modern addiction to novelty, ultra-modernism, the rejection of heritage, of tradition, in the best sense of the word, do not belong to it. On the contrary, the first part of our study should have demonstrated that the insightful recognition of our foundations, which modernists wish to discard absolutely, are of decisive importance. It will depend on us whether the problem of aperspectival time is resolved successfully, or whether it is misunderstood in terms of the deficient, rationalistic mentality. A further rationalization of time, which would also be a materialization of time, as Gebser describes it in other places, would lead to a general atomization, whereas the achronization of time would transcend the contemporary situation toward constitution and consolidation of the new efficient consciousness structure. If we surrender to the destructive deficient powers, if we ascribe to rationality a character of exclusive validity, If we continue to measure time with inappropriate measure, then we shall have indulged in mismeasurement, a hubris which is not only inadequate, but runs counter to the task. If we are able to assist in the breakthrough of originary power which is erupting to manifestation, instead of assisting the powers of unbounded machination, we can escape destruction. Since the dangers of self-destruction are great, let us briefly summarize them. In mathematics, there is a danger of atomization and deficient quantification, unless it can be kept from collapse into mere logistics and statistics. The geometrical physical treatment of time in physics has led to an atomization that can be restrained only if the qualitative elements of Planck's conception can be brought to awareness, and if the achronic structure of matter, implicitly formulated by Heisenberg, is taken to heart. The exclusion of the spiritual dimension from the inquiry into life processes will lead biology to the atomization of humanity. The robot-like propagation of artificial insemination as a mechanical exaggeration of vitalism is a good example of this. Unless insights such as those of Adolf Portman are respected, if the efforts of molecular biology are successful and applicable to controlled genetic processes, almost a certain possibility for the 1970s, humanity will be endangered in such a way that the inconceivable and catastrophic consequences of unleashed nuclear power, and it is horrible just to mention this, would appear almost harmless by comparison. In psychology, the dangers lie in psychic inflation and its deformation into psychism, in the psychic obsession that threatens to atomize the soul and drown man in the artificially stimulated whirlpool of hyper-amplified archetypes and complexes, especially when psychology forgets or even psychologizes the spiritual dimension, and in its application to the office or factory for the purpose of greater output. In philosophy, the danger lies in non-commitment. Mere concepts, categories, exegeses, analyses, and systems no longer lead to an intensified search for truth, but rather to a complete disillusion and ultimately atomization of thought. In jurisprudence, the prevalence of use value and the privileges of anonymous sectors, trusts as well as governments, together with a refusal to recognize the basis and relationships between property and work, may lead to a decline of a qualitative justification for life, thereby destroying the structure of human interrelationships. Sociology, whether political, economic, or cultural, is threatened by an ultimate loss of quality, in that the individual is threatened by a resubmersion into the anonymous mass and consequent atomization. Among the dual sciences, parapsychology is exposed to spiritualistic occultism, a kind of psychic materialism, an occultism hoping to find the spirituality of the beyond, although it usually finds only traces of materialistic spiritualism, that is, products of psychic decomposition. The progressive accentuation of the metric, motoric elements of music, as in the case of Stravinsky, would eventually lead to a complete divesting of meaning and the atomization of tones, and it remains to be seen whether electronic music can escape this danger. Continue in part 2.